Welcome to Concept Being the podcast, where the intention is well, but let's be for real. Life gets a little chaotic, and so do we. And that's totally fine. It's fine. You're fine. I'm fine. We're literally fine. And we're all about finding the balance while staying honest with health, wellness, and all the juicy topics that matter. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Concept Being the podcast, where the intention is well. We're really just doing our best here. And today's episode is all about the concept of wellness reimagined, because we are joined by the lovely Erin Clifford, who just wrote a book titled Wellness Reimagined, a holistic approach to health, happiness, and harmony. And today's episode, we're getting into the nitty-gritty about creating boundaries without guilt. We're talking about flexible wellness routines. We're talking about using values to create our flexible wellness routines. It's going to be a real good chat. So let's get into it. Okay, so Erin, welcome. I'm going to give you the microphone and let you kick things off with a moment. Do you want to start off with a grateful moment, a fail moment, or a wellness moment?
How about a fail moment?
Hey.
And so, it was interesting when you and I initially talked and we were talking about, the different kind of moments. And when you brought up a fail moment, I was interested in talking about that because I really think sometimes when things don't go our way, it's such a great learning opportunity that can really have a profound impact and turn things around for you. So when I think of a fail moment, it was really when I first started coaching. I started coaching over 10 years ago. And when I started working with people, I kind of had a certain idea of how to do certain things, what kind of dietary patterns someone should follow, different ways of exercise. And some of it was, I think at the time, me kind of exploring what worked for me. And the one thing that I realized was I was giving people things that just didn't work for them because what was supporting me at the time, might not have been from a wellness perspective what that individual needed. And so it was a huge wake up call kind of a year into doing stuff where I really realized, your job as a coach is to really help people on their own path, whatever their own path is for wellness, because there are so many different ways, to eat healthy, to exercise, to practice mindfulness, sleep hygiene. And so for me, what turned out to be something where I was kind of beating myself up about ended up being such a great thing for me because I was able to really develop my practice and even for myself, in a way where you can kind of learn what works for people. And when something doesn't work for somebody or when something doesn't work for myself, I'm able to just take a step back, give myself some grace. I try to tell my clients to do that as well. And then figure out a way, to make whatever goal you have work for you and achievable.
I love that. Thank you for sharing your fail moment. I'll share a moment. I recently just launched, I call it Vibe RX, which is a custom mini sound bath doses. And that was a really big deal for me. And I tried to pre-launch it before, I think before I even really introduced it to people. I was just like, hey guys, does anyone want this? And this was on my birthday. I did it for one day and I won't call it a fail because we have sales now, but originally when it happened, it just felt like a complete flop. So in that first day of like the pre-launch, I definitely learned like, hey, you got to like really introduce people to things and really explain what you're doing and not just throw things at people and be like, hey, this is what I think that you need. So I think that in that moment, I learned a lot about just marketing and understanding people and what they need and how they need to be introduced to things. So I think it was really helpful for me to try and launch something and then bring it back to like the drawing board and figure things out of how can I educate people on what this custom mini sound bath dose is. And so that was helpful, but in that moment, it felt like kind of like a fail. So that is my moment.
Yeah, and I love that because you really said, okay, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to use this as an opportunity. And it sounds like things are going really well now. So,
Yes.
turn that kind of fail, if you will, into a success.
Yeah. So that was a really good learning moment, but I am super excited to talk to you, Erin, about your new book, about everything. So, okay. So first, let's start off with tell us your backstory. How did you get inspired to writing your new book?
Yeah, so when I graduated from college, I kind of went on a interesting path. I taught high school in the Chicago public schools. I was an English teacher for 5 years, and I really became interested in health and wellness when I was in college. And then when I started teaching, I noticed that a lot of my students and a lot of like their families were really struggling, with their wellness and access to, wellness. And then when I was debating between either going to become a mental health counselor or going to law school. I come from a family of lawyers. And so I couldn't decide what I wanted to do. So I went to law school, which was really a great experience for me. But when I graduated, I noticed the same thing. All my legal colleagues were struggling in the same ways that, all of my high school students were in terms of their wellness, trying to figure out, how to be healthy in this crazy busy world. So it really inspired me to go back and get a certification as a health and wellness coach. And then when I started practicing with people, I really realized that, what, if you want to write your book, if you want to really be able to help people, and I had at this point kind of gotten into some corporate wellness stuff, I decided that it would be best to actually go back and get that master's in mental health counseling, which was amazing because it really tied everything together for me. So when I was in school, I kind of started doing research and things on, what eventually would become my book. And so, it's really been developed over the last 10 years. Just kind of really sitting down, working on it, getting it published was like the last two. But I'm so excited it's here and I get to share it with the world.
Congratulations on launching your book, by the way. That's such a big deal. Like, yay. So I know that you have a very, I would say like holistic view of wellness. Do you want to tell us about your holistic approach to wellness and how it's different from other people's?
Sure. So I really believe that, I think a lot of times we think of wellness as all the physical things we do, but I think of wellness as something that encompasses, yes, your physical health, but also your mental health, your emotional health, and your spiritual health. And so when you are, building out routines for yourself, building out wellness programs, or really even just figuring out personal and professional goals that you have, I really think you need to tap into all those different areas of wellness. So, for instance, I talk about this a little bit in the book. I struggled with an eating disorder, and that was sort of what prompted me to really want to learn all of this stuff I've learned after I went and got treatment and got healthy. And, so when I'm talking to someone about nutrition, or for instance, I don't just look at the physical aspect, right? You've got to consider that emotional aspect, right? For people, I mean, we celebrate around food. People, when they, can emotionally eat when they're upset about things. So all of that to me, comes into play. And also, thinking about, what works for your whole lifestyle. If you're trying to figure out, a new exercise routine or just, a way to have a little bit more mindfulness in your life, you've really got to consider all your different life domains when you're planning stuff. So I really try to tie things together for people because at the end of the day, I really believe in what I like to call harmonious living. How can your different life domains and all of the different lifestyle initiatives you bring into it kind of work together as opposed to being something that's separate from yourself? If you feel like being healthy is like a full-time job on top of your job and your family and everything else you have going on, it's not going to work for you consistently. And I'm really trying to help people with the long game, not just like those short little things.
I love that. And like this conversation right now is hitting so deeply because I'm traveling and like my wellness routine gets thrown off every time I go
Mhm.
to a different place. And so, can I ask you, how would we decide what is the most important thing for us to focus on in our wellness routine?
Yeah, so one of the things that I absolutely love that because life's chaotic, right? And so
Hmm.
I'm always about how can we find, really living by something is better than nothing adage, right? So like even if I don't have time for that hour long workout or to, cook all my food, how can I still be healthy? So when it comes to if you said I've got to pick one thing, I am always curious about what is your jam, right? So what is the thing for you that if you don't do at least in some small capacity, it is going to really impact you? So, is that I've got to make sure I get some exercise in. Like for me, I travel a lot for speaking. And even if I can't get my regular workouts in, I always try to bring my exercise bands and like do 20 minutes a couple times a week because that gets me moving even if I don't have access to the food or I don't have time to do my meditation, right? So what is your thing? Are you like, what? I've got to get a little meditation in. And maybe when I'm traveling, I don't have time to do what I might do at home, but can I even get 5 minutes in? Or if food is really something that's important to you, can I still make sure I'm still getting in, 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day because I'm just going to feel better and have that, nutrients and fiber if I do that. So I would just tell everybody, what is like the one thing you're like, this is kind of my non-negotiable. If I know I want to not just physically be my best, but I mentally want to be my best, I've got to make sure I get in, even if it's in these little pockets of self-care.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Where it's just like you need to pick like what your main thing is. I think for me it's definitely exercise. Like I also have my bands with me just cuz I feel kind of just not my best when I'm not exercising. So that is important. And also food. I really need food. And so every time I go to a different place, I'm like, okay, let me figure out where the grocery store is, how I can make sure that I'm getting good, healthy meals that are like
Mhm.
sustaining me. So I love that you said that. One thing that I think that this brings up is like being flexible with your wellness routine and making sure that you're not just being rigid with it, which I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, where they think that their wellness routine just needs to be the same thing that it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But a lot of people evolve in just the way that they're living, their energy. What would your recommendation be for just being flexible with your wellness routine?
Yeah, like one of the things I talk a lot about in my book and when I work with people is, creating flexible routines, right? Because if I have a flexible routine, I can kind of, change. I have a base, right? But I'm able to change it up as, things change, and our bodies change too. When we go through different, like as women, right? When we go through different hormone changes, sometimes we need different things. You might have an injury and need, or have a medical condition and need to change some stuff, or just in life, stuff happens. You get really busy at work and you're like, man, like that routine I had going is just not going to work for me. So I think it's really important to just be mindful of that. And then when you do feel like you need to make a shift, just make a shift and don't feel bad about it. I think the biggest hurdle that people struggle with is when we get out of these strict routines that we're used to following, we start to like feel bad about ourselves and we don't do anything. So I think it's really about just even when you get out of your routine or you feel like you need to make some changes, just giving yourself like grace. Like I did Pilates with my teacher, Susan, this morning. And, we were actually talking because so I'm in my mid 40s and I have some issues now with like my hip and my knees just from overuse over the years. And so I can't do some things I used to do, like higher impact, like exercise. And I was, I've told her before, I'm kind of bummed out, but it's like, what? My body has changed. And now I've just kind of got to make a shift. So maybe some things I can't do, I've replaced them with other things. And, now I'm really enjoying like my exercise again because I'm like, you know what? That's okay. Like that running, that hardcore stuff was a different part of your life. And now you're kind of shifting into this. So I do think it's important though, as women, is that we kind of listen to our bodies and what we need and don't feel like bad about it, right? Life is always changing and we just kind of have to kind of go with it sometimes.
Yes, I resonate so much with that because I have been just like really focusing on like working with my cycle when I'm trying
Mhm.
to work, where it's like, okay, you know what? You might not feel like pushing through right now. Like maybe you need a nap and you need to honor that. So I think that that is really beautiful that you brought that up. And I think that that's self care, right? Where it's just like you're not always pushing through. Sometimes you're just like, you know what? I know that I need rest, and rest is a part of your wellness routine and your self care. So, yeah, I do want to talk about self care because self care, I love self care. So, I know that you talk about like social, spiritual, and professional self care. Can you give us one way for us to show up in each of those categories for our self care?
So, it's you brought in spiritual, and I've actually been thinking about this a lot lately. So, we all have different ways, right? We connect with the spiritual. Some people it's religion, some people it's just being outside in nature, some people it's meditating. But one thing that I think we could all access from a spiritual standpoint is really that self compassion. Right. When we talk about having self compassion, giving ourselves grace, we don't have to be perfect all the time. I think that really ties into that spiritual domain. And for, as all of us, especially for women, right, we can be really hard on ourselves. And so I always like to tap into that a little bit too. I think that's just something that's really helpful. In the professional space, I really think it's important to have boundaries. If you want to, I always say, limits liberate us, right? So if we want to make sure that, we are living our lives the way we want and having like that freedom, we've got to have some boundaries in place. So, when it comes to your, workspace, making sure, you have boundaries with your different colleagues. I think one big thing with boundaries, though, for all of us in the age we live in is like those technology, especially around like work stuff, because I feel like over the last 5 years, people are, we do a lot of stuff online, or people are like tech. I get texts now for things before where it would be like a telephone call. And I think we sometimes feel like, we have to answer immediately. We never give ourselves those breaks. But I also think you should figure out, I always tell everyone they should have some technology cutoff time. That doesn't mean maybe you don't do some work or some stuff, but you shouldn't feel like you need to be accessible to everybody like 24/7.
Yes. Oh my God. I think that that is so important to definitely have boundaries. But since you brought up boundaries, how do you think that we can set a boundary that feels good for us, but also for other
Yeah,
people?
I think like when it comes to things at work, if for instance, if you're a lot of people have like work hours, right? Like, so and they're not always the same, right? Some people work from 7 to 3, some people work 9 to 5, whatever your work hours are. But I mean, I think it's fine to say, to somebody, if they keep like kind of stepping over those boundaries, just saying, hey, look, I know that these are my hours. If it's an emergency, please reach out to me, by telephone if you need an emergency, because I won't be available, email, outside of this scope. And I think some things too with work is we have to check ourselves, right? We're the worst with our boundaries. If I am constantly responding to people like after hours, what are those people going to think? They're going to think it's fine, right? To keep reaching out to me after hours. So, I think it's good to put those verbal boundaries in place, but also just pay attention to how you respond to someone. If you feel like, hey, I've got to write this text or write this email out, that's fine. But like maybe you schedule it to go out the next morning as opposed to 8 at night, when then they think that they, can contact you. And just even little cues, like, I was talking to, I did a corporate workshop a few weeks ago, and we were talking about how some people just have on their phones that do not disturb. He's like, I put it on at 6 o'clock when I get home every single night. I have a few VIPs on there, and they know they can call me if they really need something. But if anyone reaches out to me, they see that do not disturb on, so they know I'm not going to respond to their text message. So I think like using those technology things that we have now can be helpful, but also just having conversations with people. And I know it can be hard sometimes, but I think it's one of those things, like it's practice, right? Like if I was going to run a marathon, I can't just go run a marathon. I have to like continuously train for it. I feel like with using boundaries, especially when we have to talk to loved ones or colleagues, it can make us kind of anxious. So another thing is just planning out what you're going to say before and kind of visualizing how that's going to go can be really helpful too. So even if you have to have a difficult conversation, maybe with your partner or a good friend, can you kind of plan out what you're going to say before? And remember, as I said, if they kind of come at you with something and you're not really sure, yet you're allowed to say, hey, I need a minute to think about that, and I'll get back to you. I think sometimes we feel like, boom, we've got to answer right away because this world is so fast paced, and when we get anxious, we don't know what to do. But I think it's a lot of just like planning, practicing, and just making sure on our end that we keep our boundaries.
Yes. Yeah. Practicing, I think, really does help, or like writing it out beforehand just to make
Mhm.
sure that you get everything out that you want to say, I think is very important. Other than like communication boundaries or like technology boundaries, do you feel like there's any boundaries that you feel like people really don't harness enough where you're like, this would actually be life changing if you made this a boundary?
Well, one thing I think is I always tell people to be wary of the extras, right? So we all have our jobs, we all have, our commitments in our personal lives with family and different things. But, people who are, high performing and reliable, we get asked to do a lot of stuff, right? You get asked to, be involved in, maybe a committee for something, or like plan a fundraiser, or maybe you've got like a great group of friends and everybody's always asking you all the time, hey, do you want to come to this event, or do you want to go out to dinner? And a lot of times I think we say yes too much. Because we don't want to hurt people's feelings. And a good cue, and I think this works well, is when somebody asks you to do something, if in your gut right away you start feeling anxious and you're like, ugh, or you're like, you know what? I don't really want to do this, but it's in 2 months. So I'll say yes. Guess what? You're not going to want to do it in 2 months either. So I think it's really just listening to our bodies and listening to our minds, like, and our gut when it comes to doing all of these things. Like, and if you're someone who struggles, like, I know I used to really struggle with social stuff because I always felt bad and I would always say yes to everything. And my friends actually got me one of those no buttons because they're like, you need to say no more. And
Hmm.
so, but what I do now is I just say, hey, I plan out how many times a month do you want to do a social thing? Because I do think like all those extra social things kind of do add up to a lot. So to really kind of be careful of that, and just for yourself, you're like, what, maybe like I'm real busy with work right now. So maybe once a week, I'm okay with doing something, or looking at your schedule and being like, what, there's a couple weeks in there that's just not good for me. And so just planning something, down the road. And when it comes to friends too, if you've got really good friends, it's okay to tell them sometimes if you have plans, hey, you know what? I'm just really busy at work. I'm not feeling well. Can we reschedule? I think we don't do that stuff a lot. I feel really lucky. I have a couple of really good girlfriends. And we try to get together for dinner once a month. But if one of us can't go, we'll just be honest with each other, about it. And I think, that's something that you can like tap into too with your boundaries.
Yes. Okay, we will come back to boundaries because we have an entire segment on boundaries, but which I'm super excited about. But I do want to talk about values because I know values is very important. Maybe give us the lowdown on why values are super important and how the chaotic wellness girlies should start with values and
Yeah. So
bringing it into our wellness routine.
of course. So when I started like writing the book, the first part of the book, when you get through the intro, my first chapter is on values. And the reason I did that is whenever I work with a group of people consistently, or I start working with an individual client, and for myself, I always like to know, what are your top 5 values, right? Because I believe that our values, or another way to look at it is what your top 5 priorities are, your core priorities, are our North Stars. Because when our values don't align with how we're living our lives, our actions, our words, I think that's where a lot of overwhelm, burnout, and mental health concerns comes in, because we're living a life that's not what we want to be living or who we are. So I always tell people, figure out, what are your top 5 values? What are the things that are really your priorities? And then make your decisions based on those things. Because whether it's, a professional decision, a personal decision, or you're just trying to plan out a lifestyle plan, if we can intertwine our values into that, it's going to be something that just really does give us more fulfillment. So for instance, if somebody says, one of my top 5 values is just my family, well, how can I intertwine, and you're busy and you work, right? Like how, or it's, you want to spend more time, even if you don't have kids, maybe you've got like a really good friend or a partner you want to spend more time with. How can you kind of intertwine, your lifestyle domains in a way where you can do that? So for instance, maybe I involve, this individual in my workouts with me, or when we sit down and have dinner together, I don't have my phone. We're not just sitting on our phones, right? How often do we do that? And we're not even talking to each other. I love doing gratitude exercises with family members, or even like if you're living with a group of people, because it can be fun. So like having a gratitude jar in your kitchen, and each week everyone puts what they're grateful for in it, and then you spend some time talking about it, or doing a bulletin board, right? So cooking together. So finding different ways, if family, right, or friends was a value for you, to like intertwine them into your different wellness routines. But I just think, when we have like, I worked with a woman recently, and she's thinking about maybe changing jobs, and it was one of the reasons she wanted to do some coaching. And she said to me, she goes, you know what, all my values don't align with my current job at all. No wonder I'm having a hard time, right? And I need to make a change. So I just think when we don't live according to our core values, which do change as, right, as we go through different phases in our lives, your value is going to be very different, when you're in your 20s, and it's going to be maybe in your 70s, right, when you're kind of winding things down. So I just think it's important, at least once a decade, or when you have changes in your life, to kind of just do a little values check and see where you're at, because that can really help guide, all your different life decisions, whether it's, a lifestyle habit, or it's something bigger, for you.
Yes. So I think right now where a lot of people are getting so much information from social media. How do we know the difference between what our value is versus something that is kind of fed to us from social media?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's such a great point because, I actually think we spend too much time on social media, right? And if you look at, kind of all the new research coming out that like, we know that when we spend a lot of time on social media, it can impact our mental health because we're trying to strive for what somebody else has, right? Or what somebody else's life is like. So I think it's important to just take a step back and be like, okay, what's important to me, not what's important to this influencer? Because I think that can really kind of get in the way, right? Like maybe you're looking at someone, and you're like, oh, they're famous, they have all these things, is that really what's going to make you happy, right? Another way to look at it, like what's really deep down going to bring you that fulfillment, not that superficial fulfillment, right? If here, I love going shopping, and if I go buy myself some nice clothes, like, that's fun. And in the moment, I'm really liking it. But at the end of the day, that's not really feeding my soul, right? That's not like feeding me as a person. Like, that's really nice stuff to have. But, I think it's sort of that idea of for yourselves, can I pull that onion back a little bit more and not look on the outside, but kind of be like inside, what do I really want? And, sometimes what can be fun is doing like a little, like you can kind of journal, do some visualization. Like, what do you envision your life looking like? I mean, maybe some of your listeners have heard of like, doing vision boards, right? Like there's going to be a lot of things on there for you that are different than somebody else, but really at the core, what do you think is really going to make you happy? I have in my book what I call my wheel of harmony, where I go into my different life domains. And, I, one of the, two of the slivers are friends and family, and then having a community. Cause I think it's important to have a community like all of you are on this, all your girlies, right? Our community. But we know that like, if all the success in the world, whether it's financial, like, work wise, it's really great, but it also can't hug you back. Right. So making sure that we also think about, what's important to us, being, connecting with others too.
You brought up so many things, but I think the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about was goals and setting your goals and like making sure that it's not someone else's goal, it's your goal. So I know you also talk a lot about like SMART goals.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about what a SMART goal is first, and then we'll get deeper into that?
Sure. So like when it comes to SMART goals, like I like them because I think if you do it in the right way, it can help you build out an action plan. So, first off, like you want to make sure that whatever goal you have, whether it's a lifestyle goal, maybe you have a personal goal or a professional goal, you're traveling right now. Maybe someone's like, hey, my goal is I want to plan this trip, right? So you want to make sure it's specific. Okay. So what is it that you want and why do you want it? Right. That kind of goes into that idea of pulling that onion back. Right. So, I'll get people all the time that'll come to me and say, hey, I just got diagnosed with something. My doctor told me I have to change all this stuff. And I'm not really sure how to do that. And believe it or not, sometimes those really bad diagnoses are not enough for them to change. So I'm always like, well, why is it important to you to get healthy? And then it's like, well, I've got, kids or I have grandkids, or maybe it's somebody younger and they're like, I have all these career aspirations. I eventually, want to do this with my career. Maybe I want to get married, right? All these different things. And so really thinking about what do you want and why, deep down, why do you really want it? Because that's going to sustain you when you don't feel like following through on things, right? So you want to know what specific in your why, and then you want to make it measurable, right? How am I going to track that I'm, doing this goal? So, something simple like someone's like, what my goal is, I really want to have this summer, I want to start an exercise routine. I want to have a good exercise routine. Well, how are you going to track that? Are you going to track it in an app? Are you going to work with a coach, and have them kind of help you track it? Oh, is it going to be based on your blood work? I see sometimes like I've been at social media where I feel like people will put out into the world like some goal they're working on. I think they're doing it right because it's making them accountable and they're telling people right out loud. So, you need to have some way that you're going to track things and you can make it fun. I worked with a CEO once, and when he was younger and doing chores, his mom used to have like a bulletin board and they put like star stickers up. So we did that for his lifestyle habits. workouts. And it was just fun, right? So find like a fun way to track your stuff. And then you want to make it achievable. And this is really where that action plan comes in. So I always tell people, what are 3 things that you're going to do to make sure you follow through on that goal? If it's like a lifestyle goal, like adding an exercise, well, maybe I am going to schedule my workouts in my calendar. I'm going to pack my gym bag the night before so I can take it with me. And it's just easy, it's available there. And then I am going to work out with one of my girlfriends. So I know that I make sure I get all of my workouts in, right? So really kind of building those things out. If somebody was looking for a job, I'm going to, spend X amount of time a week on LinkedIn looking around. I'm going to connect with this networking group, right? So we're really kind of building that out. And also part of that achievable is also looking at any hurdles you might have, right? So a lot of times we know, and we kind of were talking about this earlier on in the conversation, that we sometimes get tripped up and then we don't end up following through on things. So what is it that happens to you when you don't follow through on stuff, right? Maybe you have some nutrition goals and you're like, usually happens to me is I don't meal prep, I forget to grocery shop, and then I get so busy that I just order carry out, right? So if I know that's going to come up, not only can I plan for it and try to, navigate it, but I also won't beat myself up too much when it happens. I can be like, okay, that happened. That was foreseeable. Now let's move on next week and kind of get moving forward, right? So we've got specific, measurable, achievable. And then you want to make sure it's relevant. Is this something that's really good for you to be doing at this point in your life? Because if this is not something that you have the time for, or something you have the resources for, you might want to shift your goal. And then we want to make sure it's time bound, right? How long are you going to go with this part of your goal? Do I need to break my goal up into little parts? I do this sometimes, like if somebody, for instance, wanted to lose weight, sometimes feeling like I want to lose those 20 pounds can be a lot, right? But if we break it up into like 5-pound increments over, the course of a month or 2 months, it can be helpful. So, I would say I would definitely wouldn't really go more than like 6 months with the goal without checking in, right? So figuring out something you can do in a month, 3 months, 6 months. And, and after that, we want to figure out, what are you going to do to celebrate, right? Once you've accomplished whatever your goal is, or that phase of your goal, what are you going to do to celebrate? Are you going to get a massage, get a pedicure, buy a new pair of gym shoes, take a little vacation, whatever it is. But, making sure that your goals have an action plan, they're organized, and you do have some way of rewarding yourself and something you can look forward to already set up from the beginning.
Yes. Okay. I feel like, okay, so I've definitely heard of SMART goals before. I've used it before in corporate America, but they usually leave out the celebration part, which I really think that if there was they should have sold that to me when I was doing my yearly goals, or else I'd be like, okay, yes, once I hit this, I get this. So I love that you add that in there. I think that's very important. And I think that that's almost for me like a missing piece. I love a little reward or something after I
Yeah.
complete something. So thank
I
you
do
for bringing that
too.
in.
I love,
Yeah.
you've got to do something to I'm a big solution focused. Let's cheerlead a little bit. All right. And so you got to celebrate.
Yeah, buy yourself a little gift or something after. I love a little gift, or take yourself out to dinner, get some ice cream
Exactly.
afterwards. But I feel like normally the SMART goals don't incorporate that. So, yes. Okay. So, my next question is, can you help me smartify a goal now that we know what
Sure.
SMART means?
Yes.
Okay. So, this one, I'm going to be honest with you, is my goal
Okay.
because I'm working on it. But my goal is I just want to wake up and not automatically scroll through TikTok. So,
Okay.
how can I smartify that goal?
Okay. So your specific goal is you want to wake up and not scroll through TikTok.
Yes.
Why do you want to do that? What do you think would make your life better if you weren't waking up and doing that?
I think that, well, I feel like we know that waking up and automatically going on social media is just
Mhm.
too much of a dopamine hit right at the very beginning of your day, right? So there's that aspect of it. I do feel like when I start my day off going on TikTok, it just kind of it's a little bit low vibrational for me, where I just feel like my entire rest of the day I'm just kind of you kind of already messed it up a little bit. You started off on TikTok, and it's not just 20 minutes, it's an hour to 2 hours on TikTok. So that time I could be using doing something else. So those are my reasons. It's too much of a dopamine hit, and I feel like I could be using that time for something else.
Yeah. And like, what do you envision using that time for?
Well, my typical morning routine, I used to have my morning routine really, really down pat, where I would wake up, I would make green tea, and then I would listen to like positive affirmations, meditate, work out, and then go to work. That was the structure, and it was usually about 2 hours that it took to do all of those things. So I'm thinking that that would be the vibes. Like that would be my ideal morning routine. So taking TikTok out, I think, and replacing it with that I think would be my goal.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah. So, what you really want to do is, take the TikTok out because it's not a good dopamine hit in the morning. You're wasting your time, and you really want to start your day off with in a positive way with this morning
Yes.
routine that you used to really enjoy that sets you up for the day. Yeah.
Yes.
And how are you going to measure that you're doing this every day?
I think that measuring it would be just my like time on TikTok, like my screen time.
Yeah, exactly, right? So and that's easy to track, right? You can
Yeah.
easily track your time on TikTok. And so, we want to make sure this is achievable. So what do you think are like 3 things you can do to make it achievable?
Okay, three things that I think to make it achievable. I honestly really think that this starts at nighttime. So I think my issue is because I wake up, TikTok, go to sleep, TikTok.
Yeah.
So I think the issue here is like going to sleep with my phone like right next to me because I was just on TikTok. It's so easy for me to just grab
Yeah,
it.
get up and
And
grab it.
so, yeah, I think the first thing that I would do is like trying to leave my phone a little bit further from me. So I have to actually get up to go get my phone. I think that that would be number one, like the first
Okay? I love that.
achievable thing,
Yeah.
leaving your phone away from you.
Yeah.
I think the next thing that could be an achievable thing for me to do, how am I going to achieve this? Hmm, that, that, that's as far as I got, Erin. I don't know.
Okay,
Um,
so
yeah,
yeah, so the first thing you can do is before you go to bed at night, make sure that your phone is not right next to you. Okay.
yes.
So then what are you going to do? Right. So it sounds like right now, when you get up in the morning, the first thing you do is grab your phone. What could we do instead?
I'm trying to think of things that aren't on my phone, and there's so many things that are on my phone. Cause the thing is like, yeah, maybe I don't want to go into TikTok, but like maybe I want to like listen to morning affirmations. So, but you know what? I could listen to it on my computer.
You're gonna keep that phone away the night before. When you get up, instead of grabbing your phone, you're gonna listen to your morning affirmations on your computer, maybe make your cup of tea, and kind of
Yes.
start your morning like that, right? And then I'm just wondering for like a third thing, like when would it feel good for you to go on TikTok? So you're like, okay, I'm not going to go look at TikTok until maybe a certain time of day.
I think that at like 10 a.m. would be good. I think that at least giving myself 2 hours of not being on my phone for TikTok, I think that that's good enough. And then at 10 a.m., it would be appropriate for me to pop onto TikTok.
Okay. And what do you foresee getting in the way of you following through on these 3 things?
I think that, what do I foresee myself? I think the nighttime routine is a thing that would get in the way. And then just me wanting to check my emails would get in the way, where it's just like there's other things on my phone that I could see myself just let me go on here to look for other things, but then I get sidetracked and then go on to TikTok. So
Yeah.
I think that those are two things that I think would get in my way.
Okay. And so what I would just say about that is when it happens, right? Because it's going to happen and that's okay. We're creatures of habit, all of us. So when it happens, just be aware of that and be like, okay, time to stop. And
Hmm.
or if it just happens and you go crazy one night on TikTok, right? Then the next day just say, okay, I'm going to start over, right? Instead of beating yourself up, I'm going to start over, right? So if that does come up, don't be surprised, don't get upset about it. Just be like, okay, haha, I when I'm spending too much time on there, I'm not going to do it again, because I really like that idea of, just to repeat again, putting that phone somewhere else the night before when you get up in the morning, listening to the affirmations on your computer, and then staying off of your phone, like all those apps, until 10 a.m. because that's going to give you a nice morning routine. And, the next part of goals is relevant. And I would imagine this is really relevant for you, right? Because you're trying to build your business. Yeah. And so, are there any other reasons you feel like this is like a good time for you to do this?
I think that you hit the nail on the head with I'm trying to build my business. I think that I need to be focused and I just don't feel my best when I wake up and go onto TikTok. So I think
Yeah.
that that would be the main two things. Like, yeah, you need to be able to focus, be in your right mindset for building and creating. So those are
Yeah.
my two things. Yeah.
All right. And then from like a timing perspective, how long do you want to like try this and then kind of evaluate if it's working? Is sort of how I would look at this.
I would give myself I think 60 days is a good amount of time. Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. So for the next 60 days, you're going to focus on this and kind of reevaluate if this is still working for you. And if it's not, at that time, you can make any shifts. But when it does work and you follow through on this, what are you going to do to celebrate?
What am I going to do to celebrate? That's a good question. What do I want? What do I want? Gosh, I feel like this is a really great place for me to be in because I'm like, I feel like I have everything that I want. So that's lovely. I think, you know what, then it would just be a really nice dinner for me that I think would be appropriate where it's like, let's take yourself out to dinner. Or because it's my morning routine, maybe a good breakfast, like a really nice
I love
breakfast.
that. You're going to treat
Yeah.
yourself to a wonderful breakfast to celebrate.
Yes, yes. Okay. Thank you so much for helping me
Yeah.
smartify that goal. Okay, I'm excited. I'm going to give it a go because
I know.
I've
I'm
tried
going
to
to
stay
check
off of
in with
TikTok.
you and see how it's going.
Yes, thank you so much. I do want to move into our next round if you're ready.
Mhm.
So typically we have myth or fact, which myth or fact is basically where I would say a statement and you would tell me if it's myth or if it's fact. But for you, I would like to remix it a bit and we're going to play boundary, red flag, or green flag. And so the idea behind this is there's this conversation where people are like, hey, is this really a boundary or are you just kind of like avoiding things? So I would like your help or
Sure.
your thoughts and opinions on these things. So if you want to, when I read these things out, you can either say like that's avoidance or that is a boundary. Or if you want to, you can give us a little bit more
Okay.
information on it. Okay.
Sure.
So here we go. The first one, your friend cancels plans last minute every time and says they're practicing self care.
To me, I think that's, I would say avoidance or something else is going on. Maybe it's not avoidance, but like, I think it's good to, to cancel sometimes when we need to. But like, if I was in that situation, I would just talk to my friend and be like, hey, I've noticed like, that every time we have plans you're canceling. How are you doing? Also, like, is there something, maybe it's something different we should be doing together, right? Maybe your friend's working on, a certain lifestyle like plan right now, and maybe going out, for instance, in the evening and having alcohol is something they don't want to do. So, like, having a conversation could maybe be like, okay, maybe we'll take a walk together instead. So, I would actually check in with my friend and see what's going on.
Hey, yes. Okay. So this one, partner says they need a solo vacation without you.
I
Thoughts?
mean, to me, I think that's a little like mixed because it's a whole vacation, right? Like,
Hmm.
I think it's totally normal to, want to go have some like alone time. Or if it was like, hey, I want to go to this like retreat or something, right? Because I'll do that sometimes and I'm not going to bring my husband with me on a retreat. But, I also would kind of, again, I'd really maybe want to talk to that individual more about like, why do you want to take a vacation without me?
Yeah. Okay. I think that that is definitely a conversation to be had because I don't know if that would fly with some people.
Yeah.
So,
Well, yeah, exactly.
like some people, yes. Okay. But we will leave that one there. Let's see. So, someone goes to group chat because it's too much energy.
I can see that being a boundary,
Okay.
because sometimes group chats can like I've been on some of them where it's like, okay, like it was about what time people were getting to a place or maybe what people are going to wear and then it turns into days of all this nonsense. So I could see that being a boundary.
Okay. That one's a boundary. Okay. Is this one a boundary? If they skip every family gathering and say it's for emotional protection.
Believe it or not, I think for some people that's a boundary.
Hmm.
I work, I mean, I can, if you have a if you're very triggered by your family because you've had some trauma, or like I work with some people that are in recovery, and there's just certain people that they cannot be around for at least for a period of time. I can see that being a boundary. But I think that to me would be, do we have to have do you need to have a conversation, or even just send a note or like something to your family members to explain why you're not?
So, next one, and we'll make this one our last one. And this one's about work. So, someone refuses to take on anything that isn't in their job description. Is that a boundary, or are they just like a bad worker or avoiding work?
I think that to me, again, like, some of these can go either way. Like, I mean, at work, sometimes, we do get asked like to do some extra things. And, depending on like, if I'm working somewhere and my goal is to like move up the ladder, right? I might actually want to take on some of this extra stuff because if I think there's some movement for growth there, I want to prove that I'm, a really good employee. Now, having said that, you should not, be walked all over, right? Like if you have certain hours that you're working, that you're getting paid for, you shouldn't be asked to be doing all this extra stuff that you're not getting compensated for either. So I think it kind of, to me, that sort of depends on, the situation. But I do, if you feel like you are getting taken advantage of or you're not getting compensated, I think you definitely need to set a boundary.
Yes. Okay. I 100% agree with it. Like it depends on what your goal is on this one. So, completely agree. Thank you so much, Erin. This has been amazing. I love chatting with you about like boundaries and self-care. Can you tell us where we can find your book and where we can find you if we want to keep up with you or if we need help with our goals?
Yeah, so I am my book, Wellness Reimagined. It's available on Amazon and all your major retailers. I also personally recorded an audiobook too. So if you like those, that's available. And I have a website, erincliffordwellness.com. I'm on as Erin Wellness. I'm on Instagram. I am on Facebook, YouTube, and I post lots of like little tips and like strategies and videos. So, I'd love for people to join the community. And if anybody does want to work with me or has a question and wants to talk to me, you can reach me through my contact form on my website.
Amazing. Well, congratulations again on launching your book. I'm so happy for you. And if anyone has any questions, you guys know where to reach out to Erin. With that being said, thank you guys all so much for listening. And I hope that you have a good day or a good night. And I hope that you're well. Bye.